Hey guys, and welcome to episode 64 of the Garage Athlete Show. It's just myself tonight, joined by guest Fred Rutman. Fred is an expert in intermittent fasting, which those of you that have listened to the podcast before, it has been mentioned before, but neither myself or Dan are kind of big proponents of it, just because it doesn't tend to work for me it doesn't work. I think Dan has tried a little bit of it out himself. So me and Fred met on a Facebook forum and have kind of got chatting about all things nutrition. And I thought it would be interesting to get him on board as somebody who's got a very, very interesting backstory when it comes to like how he got into intermittent fasting. And I thought I would share that with you guys who maybe wanted to give it a try. So Fred, why don't you introduce yourself, go into a bit of your backstory, like who are you and kind of like how did you get into the whole intermittent fasting thing?
Thanks, Deej, and thanks for having me on. I have a roundabout story about how I got into the intermittent fasting. Basically, in February of 2018, I was waiting for an appointment with my cardiologist, and he walks into the exam room, and he literally throws a book at me called The Obesity Code by Dr. Jason Fung. And he says, buy this, read this, do this. And that was it. But because I've got a very complicated medical history, I actually had to get the buy-in from about 6 of my doctors before I could try this and get my medications managed and everything. But, I read the book. It made perfect sense to me. And I just went for it. I've had some ups and downs because I've subsequently had some other surgeries and things that interrupt the fasting protocol. But since I've gotten on the program, I've lost about 80 pounds, gained a ton of muscle, and had just dozens of non-scale victories. I've reversed type 2 diabetes. I've reversed the trauma from traumatic brain injuries or TBIs, and a host of other things. So
how
I couldn't
long
be a bigger fan.
How long was that 80 pounds kind of lost over? Has that been over kind of a couple of years?
Yes, since about May of 2018 to now.
Okay. So in terms of your intermittent fasting, is that fasting for like, is it an 8-hour eating? So the most common ones you kind of hear about are, I think it's the 8-16 protocol, or are you doing like days without food and then days with food?
I generally do 18 to 22 hours a day.
Okay.
Before, and that's fasting, not eating.
Yeah. Okay.
Pre-COVID, I was doing maybe oh, sorry, something went on in my computer. Just one
That's
second.
okay. We can still see you.
Okay. I was doing what my group calls a mealless Monday. Okay. So from Sunday night, say whenever you finish your dinner or supper, until Tuesday mid-afternoon or break. So it'd be 36 hours, 40 hours, 42 hours. And then I graduated to doing that twice a week. And then I got hit by COVID, which, wiped everything out. Yeah. So I've just worked my way back up to doing the 18, 19, 20 hour fast. And hopefully in December, I'm going to get back to the doing 1 or 2 longer fasts a week. Okay. Which make you feel really good.
I can imagine they do. It's interesting what you say there is that you're kind of building your body kind of up to it. So going from eating, so how many meals were you eating before? Was it like 3 big meals, like kind of what you'd call like the normal Western diet? Were you grazing kind of like throughout the day and eating non-stop? Kind of like, what did your diet look like before you got into intermittent fasting?
I think every bad eating habit is what I was doing. So at one
Okay.
point, I was 340 pounds.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
So now I'm hovering between 220 and 230, depending on the day. But as a trainer, you know that certain people adapt to certain exercise regimes more easily than others.
Yes.
And it's the same with intermittent fasting. You sort of have to get to a breakthrough point where your body understands that it doesn't want sugar as your primary fuel source anymore,
Mm.
and it's just going to be happy on the ketones.
Yeah, so
And
it's like when you
once,
go into ketos, yeah, like with the keto diet, like I've done the keto diet, and there's a period of time, and I think it changes from person to person. Like some people can get into
definitely.
ketosis in a day or two, others it takes like 2 weeks. And there's like brain fog, there's lack of energy, there's that
Mhm.
like where you literally just your brain just doesn't function because as you're
Yes.
saying, it runs off carbohydrate, but your carbs are so low for so long, your brain's just not functioning properly. And then, as I said, you go through this transition where it then starts to run off body fat.
Yeah, and all sorts of things are happening while you're learning to fast. Um, Different gene pathways are getting activated, autophagy gets activated, your growth hormone levels go off the charts. So if I remember Dr. Fung correctly, um, your growth hormone levels can return to your puberty era
Okay.
levels. So you're really building and protecting muscle. So there's often a myth that if you do intermittent fasting or fasting, you're starving yourself and your body's going to start self cannibalizing. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The body is very smart, and it knows if you have fat to burn, why would it burn your core essentials?
Mm.
If you go back to the hunter gatherer days and you hadn't eaten for a few days and you had to go out and hunt and you've got some fat to burn, why would it jeopardize burning your muscles and your heart tissue, which would prevent you from going out and being your best at hunting?
Makes
So
sense.
so that's the premise. I'm a disciple of not sure if you can see this or not. Fast
Yeah.
Feast Repeat by
Okay.
Jen Stevens. It's a New York Times bestseller, and she's my mentor in fasting. She had about a 335,000 member Facebook group, and so I'm the only male moderator in that group. So
Oh wow. Okay.
there's I see lots of questions I wish I hadn't seen, but um, I've probably answered 10,000 questions in the last 2 years,
Okay.
on every aspect. So the group focuses on the execution of fasting. How do I tweak it? Why is this not working for me?
Mm.
So, people will say, well, I fasted for 12 hours and I didn't lose any weight. That's not really how it works.
No,
It's a
no, I
training
can.
program.
People still think so. Like, my next question would be: is like, so you're fasting for 18 to 22 hours. How many meals then would you have?
Oh,
Like
I do one main meal.
one big meal. Okay.
Yeah. And then afterwards I'll have a dessert or a snack.
Okay.
So, for example, last night I had my meal um, around 6:30 our time, and then around 8:30 I went to a class, and I snacked on some pineapple and grapes, and
Okay.
that was it for my day. So I'm not purposely we don't count calories, because if you listen to people like Dr. Mark Mattson, who was a senior researcher at Johns Hopkins, which I guess is like a Cambridge, an
Mm.
American equivalent of Cambridge. Your body doesn't know what a calorie is. A calorie is a laboratory construct,
Yeah.
and your body doesn't work on the calories in, calories out, because there's literally millions of things going on in your body at the same time. But it does understand when it's nutrition or fuel in a nutrition or fuel deficit.
Okay.
So um, Go ahead.
And I understand where you're coming from in terms of your body doesn't understand calories. Calories are a man-made concept, but a calorie is just a measure of energy. So I agree, but I also kind of like disagree that at the end of the day, if that's just a regular sized meal, if you're not gorging yourself, you're probably going to be eating somewhere between the 8 to 1200 calories mark. That's just to give it as a I deal in a lot of calories just because I look at food in that way. I'm a bodybuilder, like I count calories. That's kind of like what I do. So the fact people are losing weight, is it that you're in a state where obviously you're not fueling yourself throughout the day? So your body obviously has to go into those energy stores. But because you're reducing the amount, you're reducing it down to one meal. So even if that is a really large meal, it's quite hard to get enough energy in one meal to sustain the human body for a 24-hour period. So
yes,
the whole kind of like argument of whether it's the intermittent fasting or whether you're just causing an energy deficit by reducing people's time frame in order to eat. So if I took the same amount of calories or the same amount of food and split that over 3 meals and gave it to that person, and then I gave that all to somebody in one meal, would it have the same effects?
Well, there's no doubt that people can lose weight without going into ketosis. I mean, people do that on calorie deficit diets all the time. Unfortunately, for most people, it's not a sustainable system. So they end up, gaining weight back and possibly gaining more back. This is sort of more like having an electric car with a gas engine. And, when you're fasting, you're not 100% ketosis and 100% off sugar. Your body always saves a reserve. It's a very smart system. So it's always using some amount of carbs from your body. And if it can use the majority of ketones, it's going to do that. So it's not so much an all or nothing thing. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Kind of. Well, let's move on.
Okay.
So what are kind of some of so you mentioned you've managed to reverse diabetes, you've had some kind of like brain issues and stuff that you've kind of noticed that have reversed as well. So do you want to go into a few more details about some of the other side effects of just not eating? Like, can you explain kind of like why that's happening? Or
yes. When you fast, your body has millions of pathways that it can take. Actually, even when you don't fast, there's millions of pathways that can happen. So when you fast, all sorts of systems get turned on and off. One of the key things that gets turned on is autophagy. So, or it might be pronounced autophagy across the pond. And that is a system your body has come up with where it starts cleaning out your cells at the cellular level. And it finds all these proteins that have gotten messed up and folded over and have clogged up the cells and are interfering with your mitochondria, among other cellular functions. So you're actually run autophagy 24/7, but it's sort of like being stuck in a school zone when you're driving. It can only go so fast. Once you get past, depending on the person, a 16, 18, 20-hour fast, the autophagy sort of goes onto the highway and starts burning at higher speeds and cleaning you out at higher and higher speeds. So you'll find people will report that they have scars that have disappeared. Women report that their C-section scars have disappeared This is all because of autophagy and their energy levels, their body information, everything goes away. So I played hockey growing up for 20 years. I've played football, American football. I played rugby for 10 years. I mean, my body was really beat up. I was really overweight. And here I am, 3 years into fasting. I don't have an ache or pain in my body. It just really clears everything out. It helps your brain think more clearly. It activates what Dr. Matson calls neurotropic agents. So if you've had some peripheral nerve disease from your diabetes or from being overweight or from whatever condition, it actually helps to reverse that. It starts building new synapses. It helps your reflexes. It just goes on and on and on. So all these things happen.
It's one of those things where, as you said, if you go back to the hunter-gatherer days, it's more in line with how our body evolved. Like as a hunter-gatherer, you don't get food 5-6 meals a day. Well, you don't get food every day. if you're living in the wild, you'll go through, as you said, periods where food is abundant and then periods where it's not. And then so it's one of those things there's definitely going to probably be some systems that have evolved along that in terms of rest and repair. And I can see why it would be beneficial for the body to kind of be able to do that, just because, again, it's the way that kind of like humans evolved. So if somebody wanted to kind of get the benefits from intermittent fasting, do they have to be doing it where they're doing, say, a 18 to 22 hour fast like every day? Is there any benefits from doing just one off fast? Like you said, if you're just missing a day and a half's worth of food, but the rest of the time kind of you're eating normal, like what are sort of the mechanisms? Does the body kind of have to kind of get into this state and then stay in this state? Or is it something you can dip in and out of?
Consistency is generally better, but there's, different definitions of consistency. When I started, I was doing 12-12. So shorter fasts. I was diabetic at the time. We didn't know how my body was going to respond. And then, I think within 3 months, I was doing, 20-hour fasts without a problem. I do what's called a clean fast. Other proponents of fasting don't abide by this. So I only drink water or black tea. No artificial sweeteners, no cream in the coffee, no bone broth, no anything like that. And it's easier for your body to figure out that you're fasting when you're not actually putting food in it on an intermittent basis. So depending on, your dieting history, your overall health, your age, some people can get away with fasting 2 days a week. The first thing fasting does for you is it gives your digestive system a rest. And your body flows off your digestive system and your microbiome. And if your microbiome is out of whack, so you've got all these bad bacteria that are overwhelming your good bacteria, your body's just going to be generally inflamed and it's not going to work optimally. So when you get your digestive tract relaxed and able to beat off those bad bacteria, everything's going to get better. And your insulin levels are going to drop. And when your insulin levels start dropping, your blood pressure is going to go down. So your blood pressure is partially governed by the vagus nerve, but it's also governed by the amounts of free insulin floating in your bloodstream. So the more you eat, the more often you eat, and the more insulin resistant you become, the more free insulin is in your system, which hardens your arteries. So it makes it harder for them to flex and lower your blood pressure when it needs to be. And it keeps you at an artificially elevated high blood pressure, which isn't good for anybody. So a sort of convoluted long answer. Yes, you can do smaller amounts of fasting, and it is very, very good for some people. One of the women that was on my friend Jin's podcast, I believe she did fasting 2 days a week, and she lost 60 pounds, reversed her polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, and all sorts of things like that.
Okay.
So
it's something that I've come across in the past. It's a fasting protocol called the 5-2 diet, which is probably the one you're mentioning, which is where you eat relatively normally for like 5 days a week, and then have 2 days a week where you go to then one meal kind of like a day. I think there's a book on it that's called the 5. There's so many like variations of intermittent fasting now. It's kind of this is why I was going into the questions of like how long, and then can you do it for kind of like different days, just because everybody seems to have different opinions. And then I've seen people that will go like weeks without food once they're kind of like into it, as you mentioned before, where they do like meditation retreats, and basically they'll only drink water or tea, and they just won't eat for a week. And it's tends to be eccentric like CEOs that tend to kind of do that. But is that something that you've kind of like heard about? Is it something that you've known anybody to do? Like, what do you feel like that's of a benefit, or that's taking things a bit too far?
I think there are occasions when that is something that would be beneficial to you. And I know there's clinics in Europe that will put you on 10 and 20-day fasts. You've got to be those are medically supervised though.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different, what's the phrase? Ball of wax?
Kettle of fish, it'd be in the UK.
Kettle of fish, yes.
Yeah.
So the lady I follow, we only recommend up to a 72-hour fast once a month.
Right.
And simply because once you get past the 48-hour mark of your fast, the pathways that have been beneficial really start to drop off.
Right.
So you've sort of peaked at your levels of autophagy and repair. You've peaked at your growth hormone, and it's starting to dip low. Not that it's still not higher than when you started, but it's obviously a signal from your body that it doesn't want you to continue along this path. It's not sustainable, and these systems are going to start to burn themselves out.
So it's about finding the optimum place then.
Yeah, and what's optimum for you is not going to be optimum for me. I mean, you've got an obviously different frame. You're a bodybuilder. You have different numbers of mitochondria in your cell. Excuse me. You draw your energy differently and in bursts. Right now, I'm primarily a cycler, so I don't have, the intense demands on my energy pool that you would for lifting and flexing. So everybody has to find their own way, and that's one of the things that you don't get from a diet, because people just say, and I'm not knocking diets, I'm just saying, you go to a program like Weight Watchers and they tell you exactly what to eat.
Yeah.
And this is what you eat, and this is when you're going to eat it, and their only true measure is, does your scale move or not? Well, I'm sure from your training, your weight can remain the same, but you'll have significant body recomposition, depending on the muscle groups you're focusing on, or, whether you're pre-show, after show, things like that. So your weight is just one measure. I've gone from a size 48 pant to a 38. But Weight Watchers wouldn't care about that. They would just
be looking at the scale.
So
that's something we can 100% agree on. I'm very much a proponent of what's called flexible dieting. So getting people to understand nutrient density as well as energy density. So I don't like labeling food good and bad.
Mhm.
yes, and that's what I was saying about agreeing, but also disagreeing about calories, because calories are obviously just a measure of energy to me. Like, I'm very much into the science of it. Like, I've bodybuilded now for 5 years. I've trained with weights since I was like 13. Like, to me, I've got
Mhm.
no emotional attachment to food. It's just fuel. So having a
That's a great
number
attitude.
on that is helpful. And even now, so I competed 3 weeks ago. I was like sub 5% body fat. My food
Wow.
focus this time in prep has been a lot better than the first time that I ever dieted. So for like 6 weeks, I just wanted to eat everything. Whereas basically this time, after about a week, after I initially got that out of my system and my body got out of that fight or flight state, it's a bit
Mhm.
like, okay, I'm back on to eating my nutrient dense single ingredient foods because I need to now fuel my body for that next stage, and thinking of my body like a high performance car. Like, if you've got a
Mhm.
Ferrari, you don't go down to the local petrol station and put the cheap petrol in it.
Yes.
You're going to spend more money to get the high end fuel to make sure that car is going to run at its kind of like best ability. And I think it's similar in terms of what you're saying, as in there's natural repair and restorative pathways within the human body. And intermittent fasting sounds like just one way to activate those pathways, just on a more optimized scale than especially what the Western diet seems to be doing. Where the Western diet goes, illness follows, as I'm
Yes.
sure you're aware. And the
Yes.
majority of the Western diet is highly processed, additives, all this stuff our body isn't used to. It's only come around in the last 100 years, and we evolve a lot slower than that. Whereas something like intermittent fasting, our body's a lot more used to that. So I can see why that system would our bodies would adapt to that system well, because it knows that's kind of like what it already knows. So I think it's exactly what you've just said a moment ago, as in everybody needs to find their own way, their own system. Everybody's genetics, epigenetics, where they live,
Mhm.
the food they've got available, all these things play a factor. And I have actually I've got some clients that work in the healthcare systems. They work for the NHS.
Mhm.
Now, the working practices of what is our National Health Service are probably some of the most unhealthy I have ever seen. They work
Oh,
for
yes.
13 hours straight. Sometimes they won't get a break. They don't have facilities to be able to cook proper food. They might work a 13-hour day with no break, and that's like semi-regularly. So when you see doctors, nurses, things like that all have BMIs of like 25, 30 plus, and
Mhm.
they're the ones that are meant to be looking after the national health. And then you kind of look into these practices about kind of like what's going on. But what's happening is they're picking throughout that night shift. So they're on for 13 hours, but they're snacking throughout it. Whereas what I've done with one of them is, right, let's do intermittent fasting. So you wake up, you have your largest meal, you then go and do your work shift, which is 13 hours long. You then basically don't eat again until the next day when you have that kind of large meal. And he's got on with it really, really well. His energy levels are better because he doesn't have to think about it now. And he doesn't have to worry that he's snacking. He has some EAAs in his drink, which is just some essential amino acids, and water and black coffee if he's on a night shift. And that's it. So I think for some people, it works really, really well. As I mentioned to yourself before, like when I've tried fasting, I just get really moody. I'm used to eating 6 meals a day. So going from six
Mhm.
meals down to one, it's too big a kind of like shock to my system that I'm just a grumpy bastard, if I'm being honest. My missus
Yeah.
hates it when I'm hungry, and like when I'm dieting, that's just a small kind of snippet of what it would be if I kind of drop down to kind of like one meal a day. So
Mhm. So maybe that's not the right process for you to undertake as you're learning to fast,
Yeah.
because it is too drastic. So maybe you could be doing, a 16-8 and go to 3 or 4 meals during that 8, and then gradually taper off. I know Aaron Stern, who's a former Miss Olympia, does some intermittent fasting as part of her competition prep.
Okay, I'll have to look her up.
But granted, female body, male body, slightly different. And,
yeah, a little bit. Cool. So was there anything else kind of like you wanted to cover? You've answered pretty much all the questions like I had ready, in kind of like what we've got in the back and forth. Is there anything else kind of like you wanted to cover?
A couple of things, and you touched on them. We're so genetically different, even though we're all humans. Our internal structures, we all have cells and muscles and hearts and organs and things like that. But our bio-individuality is just so pronounced. And, some people can work on a high fat, low carb, or a low fat, high carb, or something in between. And maybe that works for that month. And then their body says, hey, let's do something different. Like, you've always got to be tweaking. There's a guy in, I believe he's in London, Dr. Tim Spector. He runs the Zoe study, and he actually sends food out to participants and then has them eat it, specific muffins and different things, then has them do blood draws. They're on a continuous glucose monitor. And then he gives you analysis on, how fast you clear alcohols, how fast you clear fats, how fast you clear sugars, et cetera, et cetera. And it's made a huge difference for a lot of the people I know that have done this study. It helps you adjust your eating. It doesn't tell you you can't eat this or you can't eat that. It just tells you when you eat like this, if you go out of bounds, it might affect you more than you realize you're being affected. It'll affect your sleep, and it'll affect all sorts of other things. So you might want to, explore Dr. Spector. He's a fascinating guy.
Dr. Spector, I'll have to look that up. And what was the name of that bodybuilder as well?
Aaron, E-R-I-N, Stern, S-T-E-R-N.
Okay, I will definitely check them out. So if the listeners are interested in learning more, whether it be from yourself or you said you're part of a Facebook group, like where would be the best place for them to contact you or kind of get some more information?
Well, I just started an Instagram. I've got 2 whole posts on it so far.
Nice. Okay.
One is my application to be a guest on podcasts. So my Instagram handle is repeatedly dead Fred, because that's what got me on this adventure. My heart kept stopping and nobody knew why.
Okay.
It's a crazy story outside the realm of our talk. Or they could pick up the book Fast, Feast, Repeat by Dr. Jen Stevens. She's sort of my mentor on all this, and it's her Facebook group that I moderate in. So, and that group is the Delay Don't Deny book support group.
Okay. So for the listeners, I will get all those links and post them in the description on both the podcast and the YouTube video of this. So yeah, if you want to check it out, as I said, just check the links in the description as well. So it's been great to chat to you tonight, Fred. I've learned a lot, as I said. Like it's one of those subjects where, because when I've tried it in the past, it hasn't really worked for me. It's not something I've really like delved deep into. But there's definitely some interesting science by the sounds being done kind of in this area. So it's something to keep more of an open mind on, and definitely kind of look into maybe when I'm not competing anymore and I don't need to be getting 250 grams of protein in a day.
Absolutely.
No worries.
All I can say, if there's a formerly 340-pound person who's been clinically dead a number of times can get fasting to work for him, I think most people can.
100%. Well, it's been, as I said, it's been great to catch up with you. May get back in touch about getting you on again, depending on the response that we get. If we get a few questions and stuff through that I can't answer, we'll definitely get you on to get some of those answered. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your, I'm guessing it's early afternoon there.
Yes.
Yeah, no worries. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.